with that one. Good.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us, both here in person and virtually on the conference platform. I'm absolutely delighted that we are able to chair this event, so thank you very much to Russell and Teach First for partnering with us on it. Thank you to our speakers for joining us to think about the topic which I think is the most important topic that could possibly be being considered at the moment. Not the budget, not anything else, but catching up. How can we level up education after the pandemic? We have an absolutely fantastic panel of speakers with us. I will rattle through them very quickly. Rachel Wolfe, founding director of Public First, as well as Education Powerhouse, that's how I'm going to describe you. Rick Holden, the MP for North West Durham, and a former education special advisor. Russell Hobby, the chief executive of Teach First, and Claire Coutinho, who is a recent 2017. Aren't you? 19, I'm sorry. And you have a lot of experience outside of education as well in the city and in the Treasury as well. And finally, we have Nathan Delaurier, who is a teacher, an assistant head teacher who's taken time out of his day to join us and share the stories from the front line. With that, I will hand over to Rachel for her opening remarks.
Good afternoon. I see here that I have exactly 3 minutes, so I'll make 3 points. The first is, and we did some polling for the CPS on this quite recently, there is unquestionably significant worry among parents across the country about what's happened educationally from their children over the last year, and it is educationally as well as socially. A lot feel their children have fallen behind. They're particularly worried in subjects like maths, where they did not have the ability to teach them in the same way. And it's also very clear that there was real unevenness, both in terms of what children received and the kind of family environment they were in and how credible it was for them to learn. So there are obviously learning gaps and real concern across the country about what this means for their children. The second thing, though, I'd say is I think we have to accept that there is a limit to how rapidly we can make up those gaps. I think that there is some we can do with more tutoring and potentially extended hours, but this is not something that we're going to solve overnight, and it's certainly not something that we're going to solve overnight for the people who are really behind, who are most likely to be the most deprived. And I heard from a lady yesterday at a panel I was doing who had three sons close together in age, and she was obviously in despair because she felt one of them hadn't received very much. The other one had basically decided he didn't like going to school anymore and didn't like education, and God knows what was going to happen to their GCSEs. And she still has some vague hopes for the third. And she said, what do I do? What should we do? And I think beyond catch up immediately, what this does is put even more need and emphasis on having an education system where 16 isn't your only chance, and where you take seriously the ability for people to retrain, retake, learn from 16 to 19 when they are adults, when they are switching jobs, because the fundamental structural problem we have with our education system now, which has improved in many ways, I think, over the last 10 years in terms of school standards, is that it is still a one-chance system. And it's actually incredibly difficult because the systems aren't there for people to retrain properly. And we are going to have a lot of people who need to. So I think there is a problem to be solved. I think we need to recognize that not all of it can be solved short term. But the good news is I think it puts even more impetus behind what is going to have to be one of the most fundamental leveling up policies anyway. And that is have a skill system that works not only for under 16s, but for 16 to however long it is that we all live. And I think that is my 3 minutes up, so I will pass on.
I certainly can. One of the most disheartening things I actually heard during the pandemic was when I was on a call with my local NEU, which I think I somewhat bravely did, because they're mostly Labour activists in North West Durham. And they said to me, Richard, there's not going to be a problem here. We just need to keep the schools closed and the kids will just catch up. And that, to me, seemed it was so disheartening because I know that they know that's not true. And I know it's not true. And I already know that there are massive educational inequalities between constituencies like mine and other parts of the country. And I think there's that then flows onto something else, which was that there is a much broader issue here, and it really does play into levelling up. I think there's three aspects to levelling up in broad themes for me. One is that sort of general infrastructure, that ability to get to jobs, to education in constituencies like mine, which have no railway at all, no dual carriageway. Buses aren't great either. The second is good jobs and careers. That's what people want to be able to see. They don't have to move away, but if they do move away, we want to see people who have got those skills coming into communities like mine, so there's that exchange that you see in other parts of the country, and it's not just a drain away. But thirdly, it's about public services, and whether it's in the NHS or in education, one of the biggest problems we have, and it's been shown by study after study, is that schools in areas like mine, you know, I've got two of my biggest secondary schools are both RI. They remain RI because they are teachers, and the teachers don't come, and then they do come and then they leave. You end up in this cycle of problems. And I do think one of the things we didn't do as well as probably we could have done was get those, particularly for the families who were really struggling, to get that connectivity into homes. And that was an important thing we probably could have done better, and we certainly need to look out for the future, because there are so many of those families, particularly on low incomes, where their main interaction with the state, or at least the state which they trust, is through their kids' schools. And they don't like their social workers, their interactions with the criminal justice system aren't great, their broader interactions aren't fantastic, it's usually around sanctions. So there is a real link in to their local schools, and it's probably the place they trust. Two things I'd like the government to look at. Yes, we have to do some stuff on catch-up. I think Rachel's absolutely right about tutoring, but I don't think this is something that's going to happen overnight, but we need to look at that broader lifelong learning piece. I was incredibly happy that the government brought that forwards, but I think we need to do much more in that space. And I think we need to also have a broader and a more honest conversation about FE and HE and people's choices down the line, and not be funneling people into courses which A, don't suit them, B, cost the taxpayer a fortune, and C, don't actually help level up either their lives, their families' lives, or the communities and towns which I represent.
Thank you very much. There's 4 things that I want to cover that I'm going to try and fit into my 3 minutes. One, I think the pandemic didn't really create new fault lines, it exacerbated old ones. So actually it was the children who were falling behind anyway fell further behind. Either they were in a failing school, or perhaps they didn't sort of come from that background with their educational aspiration. And so actually the first thing that I wanted to talk about was actually parenting. So I think if we really are going to close the attainment gap, we really do need to work with parents. It's the single biggest determinant factor in how well a child does in education. And it's not actually the parents' education or their income or their job. It's what they do with their child. And you can see that very much in the success of the BME community, who, despite parents' educational backgrounds or their income levels, are roaring with success through many of these communities through the education system. And some of the things that I would like to see is, I think in the past, credit to the Conservatives, to someone like David Cameron, he did have a focus on parenting, but there was usually, I think, an approach of trying to take parents out of their very busy daily lives into a class over here, and actually the people who might be not sort of engaged with that kind of thing, which you really want to engage with this kind of thing, were the least likely to use those sort of services. So I think we really do need to go to where parents' attention spans are. One of the great schemes that I've seen recently is the National Literacy Trust working with the Premier League to message to fathers to read to their children, which they've had some really good successes. We know this is a really big disparity between working class and middle class children. So I think more schemes like that to engage with parents and more support for schools on how to best engage with parents would be something that I'm really passionate about. Secondly, I think careers, to echo some of the things that Rachel and Richard were saying, I think schools can be quite set up for academic success, paving the path to university, and actually for people who maybe don't see that as a future pathway for them, it can be quite a turn-off. And I think we need to really make sure we've got that careers advice and that leaning within the school to connect those students to their world of work. And Richard, I know, has got a really good story about military school and how actually children who maybe had failed through the education system, as soon as they connected that to a career ambition of their own, suddenly they had the motivation to succeed. So I think that sort of linking into your future success is really important. Thirdly, STEM, I think, is so important. We know actually there was some really interesting data out from the IFS yesterday that a small amount, the gender pay gap which exists, which is small, it's 5% between female and male graduates, is partly because the female graduates are taking STEM less. I think more generally, if you think outside of graduates, if you look at some of the skill sets that we're missing in this country, data proficiency is one which is going to be enormously important. The digital economies, 150 billion pounds worth to the economy, growing 6 times faster than the rest of the economy, and actually we rank 24th in the world in terms of data proficiency skills. So I think that's something that we need to continue to focus on. And lastly, skills. I just echoed, I think that lifelong learning stuff, and I have been so enormously proud of the skills packages that we put together as government. So not only the restart package for people who are long-term unemployed, the kickstart package for young people. Yesterday we announced extra packages for people who are older. We know that if you're 50 plus, it can be harder to retrain in life. And actually, so we've put in new schemes there. And lastly, that lifetime skills guarantee. It's quite a jargony name. I think if you said it to most members of the public, they might not recognize what that is. But there are 11 million people in this country without a level 3 qualification. That's a third of the working public. And I think that big, broad-based offer is exactly where we should be throughout people's lives.
I'm really delighted that Claire has managed to flawlessly mention there both the Premier League and STEM subjects, because Nathan, as a Teach First graduate, is a former professional footballer and also now a maths leader. So we'll hand over to Nathan for the inside scoop.
Wow. All three. Yeah, hello everyone. Firstly, it's really good to actually have had people speak before me, because currently working in a school, everything that has been said chimes perfectly with what we actually need in a school. So as mentioned, I'm assistant head teacher at Loreto High School in Manchester. And before that, I was a professional footballer, which is a massive contrast, as I'm sure you can imagine. Now, growing up, I was fortunate enough to be in a young position, earning money as a footballer, but I did have a very humble upbringing with my family situation. And education was really drilled into my head, and the importance of education from a young age. So when I stopped, I had to retire through injury. When I stopped, and I felt like I wanted to carry that on, but equally I wanted to give back. And as mentioned, I'm a Teach First graduate, and Teach First, the mission of Teach First, and actually serving the communities and the students that need us the most, which are the disadvantaged students, that did really chime with me. So taught for a few years in Bradford at Teach First School, moved back to Manchester, my hometown, as some of you might be able to tell by my accent, and I'm currently assistant head teacher at Loreto High School. Now, and my particular remit is raising attainment and looking at the outcomes of students. Now, pre-pandemic, we worked really, really hard through deliberate and targeted action to make sure that the attainment gap, which was kind of up here is our affluent intake, and here is our disadvantaged, which is our majority intake, the attainment gap was here. And pre-pandemic, we worked really hard to get the gap at more of an even footing. Now, what we've seen already in the short period of time post-pandemic is we're looking at it, and we've got the gap widening again. And really, with all the things that people have mentioned in the panel already, the action and the steps that we need to take is really clear. But I'm just going to talk about 4 things really that I think are really important. And again, a lot of it has been echoed already. So I cannot underestimate the impact of the digital divide, which we did see at the start of the pandemic. And all credit, we did receive laptops, and we had dongles, and we saw that on the ground. It did come, and we did find that by the time we got it, it came a little bit late. And that package and that problem is still there, and it's there for the next generation, and it's still there, and we need to do something about it. Another thing is the mental health of the students. As teachers, we're seeing it every day, more and more problems that students are bringing into the classroom, and schools are struggling to have the trained and the skilled capacity to deal with it. And, it doesn't take anyone with a degree to realise that if the students aren't mentally or physically well, they're not going to learn, and we can't really support them. Another thing, again, that's been mentioned is guidance and career motivation in terms of future careers, different directions, and more importantly as well, a possible change in the system so that it's not just a one-shot chance at 16. So thinking about what we can do if we don't necessarily get the grades at 16, which for a lot of students is going to be a challenge after the last 18 months. And the final thing that we'll say is linked in with all of that, and it's actually looking at the demand on teachers. With all this extra things that students are bringing to the table, the teachers are the people at the front line who are dealing with it. And that includes newly qualified teachers who have trained during a pandemic and then need that particular tailored support so that they can continue to support students, and experienced teachers who, again, we haven't gone into teaching for the money, and we will literally do everything we can for the students. And the more they bring to the table, the more support we need.
Thank you. As I think both Claire and Nathan have said, the challenges in our education system didn't begin with the pandemic. It merely revealed and amplified many of those challenges. And in our country, the quality of the education you receive depends far too much on which part of the country you grow up in and how wealthy your parents are. And kids from poorer homes were already behind by significant amounts in their qualifications before the pandemic started, and they fell further behind as a result of that pandemic as well. So my recipe for education recovery is actually a deceptively simple one. We will have a fairer education system which achieves the right outcomes for every young person when the kids that grow up in these left behind communities get to go to the best schools in our country. And if we can ensure that those best schools are in these towns and those cities, rather than where they can be found in the more affluent areas, then we will even things out. It's my recipe because I know it works, because I know there are schools in these communities who are doing outstanding things, who achieve the kind of results, both academic and vocational, and in terms of the wider sort of confidence of the young people that a top private school would be jealous of. So we just need to make sure we have more of that. And what will create more of these brilliant schools? I think there are three things that we need. Great education starts with great teaching. And unless we can attract our best and brightest into the teaching profession and equip them to thrive as well, we will be building on foundations of sand. We are in an interesting economic recovery at this moment. There's one of the top law firms which is advertising graduate starting salaries of £100,000. Your average teacher will start on about £21,000 on that. If you grow up outside of London, you are less likely to get a qualified STEM teacher who had a degree in the subject that you're studying than if you grow up inside London as well. If we want a fair education system, we've got to spread this talent across the country. The next part of the recipe is, well, what helps a teacher to perform at their best? It's the quality of leadership that they receive inside the school. And we have some brilliant and well-led schools, and we have some areas where we would wish to see that leadership spread across. But I think we need a different idea of what we mean by school leadership in the years ahead. I think too often those schools that have achieved the most outstanding results on paper have done so, in effect, by borrowing those results from other people around them. You can achieve great academic results by narrowing the curriculum to fit what is measured inside the school and hothousing the children. You can achieve them by burning out the teachers that you have and quickly replacing them with unqualified or less qualified staff. And you can achieve them by covert selection and off-rolling the pupils that you have within the school as well. I think if we truly counted the cost of the results, we would have a different set of heroes within our education system as well, and we would learn from them too. So I want a model of leadership that pays the true price for the results that are being achieved. So we need great teachers, we need strong leadership. Then finally, schools cannot do this task by themselves. Schools can only come to thrive when they are surrounded by a network of services and support and opportunities as well. And I think it's really important for us as we plan recovery that we think about the kind of policies and the kind of system in which these schools are embedded. We will be really tempted to try and do more and to increase the pressure and the scrutiny on schools. And I think there's a really strong argument, which has been made already, that we could do with slowing down a bit. The young people that we are educating have very long careers ahead of them with lots of different opportunities. If we could strip out and focus on the basics and not pile lots and lots of new initiatives onto schools, but just to do the things that we know work really, really well. I don't think there are actually any secrets or silver bullets within the education system. I think we've known for 100 years or more what actually works. We just haven't created the time and space to just keep doing it over an extended period of time. Can we use this recovery to create that focus?
Thank you. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for those contributions. Rachel, if I can just pop a challenge to you, picking up on one of Russell's points there. Obviously, as one of the founders of the Free Schools Programme and being very heavily involved in that, you know what it's like and how hard it can be to set up a new school and to get a new school in parts of the country where they're needed. How do we get the best schools to the communities? You know, if the Free Schools route isn't so open anymore, how do we work within the existing structures to get the teachers, to get the infrastructure into these areas?
So I guess if I sort of try and take it short term, medium, long term, we make it much too difficult to set up new free schools.
Yeah.
And I worry that we have gone somewhat backwards, actually, in terms of making it easy for outstanding schools to take on less highly performing schools or to expand. So I think that we need to recapture some of that. I think medium term, we probably would need to create new incentives to get people to go into and stay in areas where currently it's very hard to attract the best teachers. I think long term, this is in some sense a symptom as much of a driver of what we're trying to do with levelling up, in that if you are able to start creating a local ecosystem where people are highly trained, where you have a more thriving private sector, because one of the challenges if you're a teacher and you're moving halfway across the country is you need to take your partner with you and they might not be in teaching. Just also nicer places to live, then you start to create the environment where you're going to attract more and more of those teachers to come from those areas and stay in them. Fundamentally, you can't rely forever on paying money to people who are currently in London to go and live in other parts of the country, and nor will we need to. So fundamentally, all of those are about changing who runs the schools and who works in the schools. So I'd agree with Russell, but I think you have to take it in those stages.
Thank you. And Richard, if I could just ask you, if there was, you obviously spent a bit of time working with the department as well. If there was one policy that you could enact now or change, what would you go for? What do you think? I mean, there is no silver bullet, but what kind of silver buckshot, if you will, would you go for?
Well, I think buckshot's a bit better because it's a bit more broadly spread in this instance. I think there's a few different areas actually. You've asked me to. I suppose for my constituency, it would be just really helping transform secondary education.
Yeah.
But more broadly, I think there's stuff we need to do on childcare at the bottom end, at the young end, particularly for families who are out of work or in UC. And actually families on middle incomes when it is very tough. Those price and pressure points are very strong. I think also that 16 to 18, I think we have, when I was at school, your class sizes went down basically from when you were at primary to secondary into sixth form, and the money went up per pupil. That's not the case now. I think we really need to look at how we do something in that 16 to 18-year-old space, and then beyond that into HE. I think there are challenges throughout the sectors. I think actually the government's done quite a lot on that 5 to 16 space overall over the last couple of years. That's been a concentration. But I think around the edges are the big challenges. And as Rachel said, I think the long-term solution to a lot of the problems is the broader, essentially the levelling up agenda. That people, you don't need to constantly try and incentivize people to go to places they don't want to go. You want these places to be ecosystems in themselves, where people are either happy to go to and move in between, not places where you've got to put something in. The one thing I would say is that Labour did really well in London with the London Challenge. It transformed education in London. When I started secondary school, London was seen as, even compared to other parts of the country, was seen as, untouchably bad. And the point that Claire raised about basically its aspiration and instilling that aspiration in parents and actually in communities for their young people is absolutely vital to that. And I think we need a sort of levelling up. challenge essentially for the rest of the country as it comes to secondary education and then post-16 education as well.
I mean, it feels like some of these things all come together with the skills and levelling up and careers in schools. And I know this is something that you were talking about. And Claire, what is there that we can be doing? What is there? Is it something that teachers can be doing to be like Nathan, to have shown the career that they've had before? Is it better careers provision in schools? Is it engaging more with local businesses? What can we do to improve these things?
I think, all of those things. So I was recently talking to someone who runs this amazing company called STEMazing. And what they do is they get female people who are working on all these STEM subjects online to do sort of video calls with young people in schools all over the country to talk about what their career is, try and do sort of interesting exercises with children in primary schools, for example. So they were telling me about sort of like a rocket catapult thing that they do. You can build out of loo rolls and all kinds of mad things, which you can imagine is hugely fun for children, but also gives you a sense of what those careers are like. So I think doing much more work around what the world of work is like is really important. I actually just wanted to pick up on this point of teacher training, because I don't disagree with what people have said before, particularly around leadership and particularly about sort of getting that graduate dispersal across the country. But I don't think that is just the full solution. I think there is also this other part of the solution, which is about continual teacher training of the teachers that we have in different parts of the country. And I think if you look at our system compared to other systems around the world, you have less sort of continual training, less time for them to do continual training. Actually, they do a lot of time drawing up lesson plans versus other countries where you have either very rigorous textbooks in somewhere like Finland or much more free time and ability for them to take time out to go and upgrade their training as they go along. So they're always at that sort of best level of what we know about teacher training. So I wouldn't say it's just about sort of replacing the current set of teachers with people from London who have sort of graduated from some shiny university, but I think we should also be able to give our current teachers that sort of pathway up as well.
I'm sure Nathan is delighted to hear that he's not about to be replaced. Nathan, can I just ask, picking up on Claire's point there, you have obviously had the additional support of Teach First, but how has it been going from a very different career into teaching? Have you felt there's been enough support? Where do you feel your primary support has come from? Has it been through the Teach First route or has it been through teacher training and other developmental opportunities?
It's quite interesting because when I first started at the school in Bradford, there was an intake of it was a large school, so there were about 15 new teachers and 7 or 8 newly qualified teachers, 4 or 5 of which were Teach First, and it was marked the difference in support in the nature of the different programs and the different teacher training programs. I continuously and even up until recently have support through the Teach First organisation. Now, some of my friends who started at the same time, who went down more traditional routes, they did their PGCE kind of the normal way. So they did the degree, did the bit of training, and then it was very much like they were just left to it. And that's difficult. There's each year there seems to be something new or a different demand or a different emphasis that teachers need to consider, which really stresses the importance of ongoing training and development. And it's not like a program that's written and then that stays the same for 20, 30 years. The best supporting measures are ones that are re-examined each year, and I really did benefit from that, and it helped me kind of in my leadership journey within education, and I was able to get the skills that I needed to not just influence my classroom but influence other teachers when I was head of maths, and then other middle leaders as assistant head teacher, and that ongoing training and support is what's needed for all teachers. I know I mentioned it before, but I really feel for the teachers who are starting out new this year, and again, more so than ever, the support they need, because, hopefully I don't look that old, but I consider now, I've been teaching since 2012, I consider myself an experienced teacher, but the challenges of this year and last year, it's new for me. So then I've tried to put myself in the mind of a newly qualified teacher. It's really challenging, and so that's ongoing support is key and is crucial.
Can I just ask, because we obviously have a room full of people interested in education, or they've wandered into the wrong space. How many people in the audience have been a teacher before? Oh, that's quite good. And how many people have considered becoming a teacher, maybe in the future, maybe changing careers at some point? Great. Russell, have you spotted them all? Are you going to sign them up at the end?
I've got your name.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And it's great to see that level of engagement because, Russell, I mean, how hard is it to find people to join Teach First? How easy is it to get people passionate and excited about education? I imagine most parents during this pandemic have a newfound respect for what it is to be a teacher. Is that translating through?
It started to translate through. So last year there was a rise in applications both to Teach First and to every other route into teaching as well. But to be honest, that happens in every economic downturn too, because public sector work is secure in those environments. So that was to be expected. In normal years, we find that unfortunately the overall prestige and status of teaching has been declining over a few years now. So it's getting harder and harder to excite people with the profession. People like the idea of the impact that they can make and working with young people and making a difference in that regard. The salaries do play a significant role. They're a signal of the value that we send as a society. I thought that the policy that was proposed to raise teacher starting salaries to 30,000 was a good policy, and that would have probably meant that we could all get the supply of teachers that we needed to start. I agree, it's not enough to just have the initial starting. You've got to look after them all the way on from there. We then lose a lot of teachers as we go. About 20% of people who've trained leave after the first 2 years. 40% of them have left after 5 years as well. And so all of that money that we've put in, we have to spend again as well. So getting the working conditions right is another thing. And for me, you know, I hear workload spoken about a lot. I think workload is intense in schools, but I think it's the nature of the work, not the volume of the work, that's critical within limits of that. I don't necessarily hear teachers complaining about working hard when they're directly with children or when they're planning lessons or they're developing that. It's the bureaucracy and administration and data collection and distribution and so on that gets in the way. Again, if we could strip schools back to focus on the basics of this, which is fundamentally, it's really all about teaching and looking after the young people, and everything else should follow on from that, then I think we might have a calmer and more sustainable school system. We wouldn't need to recruit as many up front, and we'd keep some of those people we'd invested in as well.
I promise not to talk for too much, so I don't know if we have any questions in the audience, but please do start popping your hands up, and my colleague will be coming round with a microphone. If you are happy to state where you are from and your name, that would be brilliant. And we've got quite a lot of panelists, so everybody might not answer each question, but let's start with this lady right at the front. Thank you, Gerard.
Thank you very much. I'll say immediately, I'm not a teacher, and thank you for all your interesting contributions. I want to ask you about the power of online teaching to help us level up. And I will now declare an interest because I'm the Chief Executive of the Invicta Online Academy, which is an online academy delivering maths, top quality, maths and English lessons taught by qualified teachers experienced in digital provision direct into children's homes. And we are a product of necessity. We were set up last summer in the middle of the pandemic when so many children were left stranded and had no live lessons. But what started as a stopgap has exploded. And we now find every holiday we're inundated with demand. And 94% of our children come from state schools. 26% of them are on free school meals. And 80% of them are from BAME backgrounds. And so what we found counterintuitively is that actually state school parents are really, really keen to help their children catch up. Face-to-face is obviously best. But what do you think of this as a supplementary provision to help our children catch up and level up once and for all? Thank you.
Claire, do you want to jump into that?
Can I just, yes, and Anna, the work you do is amazing. She's operating in my area and it is phenomenal. I just wanted to pick up this really interesting fact you had about the 80%, because talking to a lot of education groups, particularly where there's a sort of a free enhancing education offer, a lot of them say the same things. If you're a low income area and you've got these I hate the phrase BME, I have to admit, but if you've got, so, you know, those communities who we know are very high aspirations in education, the word will spread instantly that this offer is there, and it's hugely taken up because of that parental aspiration, no matter what their income or background is. And you said 80% of the take-up is from these BME families. And I think this is the nut that we have to crack, because there is so much that online education can offer. There's some really interesting, you know, charities which do brilliant after-school clubs, all of these wonderful things. But we need to spread that desire, I think, for people to take up those offers. And I think that's just really important.
Would anybody else like to jump in on that? Next question. Gentleman at the back.
Hiya. So I think some of the main themes you've gone over are essentially about getting valued qualifications, getting valuable knowledge, getting people ready for something that's market relevant, and essentially in a position to have a career for students. I appreciate that's for when they're a bit older. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on using something like apprenticeships for this, because I know that's something that's been a bit more relevant recently, but hasn't been discussed yet.
Richard, do you want to talk about apprenticeships?
Yes, I'll happily talk about apprenticeships. No, I think I couldn't. I just, first of all, Anna did some great work with what she's been doing with Invicta over the summer and continuing to, and I think it's fantastic. I think it's just that point that Claire made about ensuring that ambition is there amongst all parents is obviously crucially important. But to now come to your apprenticeships point, I think for so many of my constituents, actually that traditional route of apprenticeships is actually something that's actually very valued. I think it's quite clear to me that it's such an obvious answer to so many issues that we face. I don't understand why we've entered into a situation where nurses have to do a 3-year degree and then have to do 2 years basically on the job before they're qualified, rather than being able to do a degree apprenticeship and maybe starting as an HCA within that. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me why police officers now have to have a degree before being able to start, whereas once upon a time they were police cadets and did on-the-job training all the way through. I think we've gone down a rabbit warren on trying to force people into a 3-year degree course rather than teaching them on the job, and that can include a degree apprenticeship. I've got no problem with that whatsoever, in order to ensure that actually that status thing, which has actually been the traditional issue, is addressed. I think if you can do something which is attached to a degree apprenticeship, I think that's really helpful. One of the big things in my community is the level 2 and level 3 qualifications. Claire's absolutely right when she talked a little bit earlier about the lack of people with level 3 skills, and we know that if you've got those level 3 skills, they're much more transferable, and it's easier to move, and your earnings are so much closer to people at that degree level. We have to really push on level 3 apprenticeships, and also not I think too often, because of the way we've seen FE, or FE has been traditionally dealt with as the previous Labour government, and then we continue to sort of really focus on the degree route. We ended up in some areas really ramming huge numbers of people who could have easily done a level 3 down a level 2 route between 16 and 18, and basically wasting 2 years of their time because the FE institutions could offer them an inexpensive course. I'm the amount of jobs available in my constituency at the moment is unbelievable. I did a jobs fair the other day, and 400 people came through the door, and all the employers were just saying we need more. And I think part of that real change we've got to see in education is certainly at 16 to see people moving into proper apprenticeship programs, working with employers from that start. I've got a very good college who do it in my patch. I think that's something we could roll out across the country.
Rachel, what is it about apprenticeships that mean they're not being treated in the same way as other education pathways? Because a lot of time, a lot of investment, and a lot of focus of the government over recent years has gone into apprenticeships. Why is that not trickling through?
So I guess a couple of points. Generally, we still dramatically underfund FE compared to other parts of the school system. That's been true for a long time. I think one of my main hopes of this lifelong loan guarantee, whatever you call it, is that you start to allow people to make choices with kind of relatively similar funding behind it. So we don't have a sort of broad system. I think the apprenticeship levy has been good in somewhat increasing the number of higher level apprenticeships available. But some of the ways in which it's structured mean that it's probably not scaling quite as fast as it could. So, I mean, that's sort of a long-winded way of agreeing with Richard. I think this is hugely important. We are on, I think, the cusp of doing some really dramatic change to the school system, which is going to make a very big difference, but it does have to happen. Just very quickly on online learning, and I also know about Invictus. You've done a remarkable job of PR, if nothing else, so congratulations. I feel like the pandemic showed both the opportunities and limits of online learning, which is why I think it is a supplement. And, you know, my own personal experience, I have a 6-year-old. I've never cried so much as trying to homeschool my 6-year-old, and online learning was definitely limiting for her, obviously that is. And it did show the need for people to be together and that there are some things that can only happen in person. But I also do think that there is far more that can be done, not only in schools, but actually also in FE and HE, to look at where you most need to teach people in person and where online can supplement. And it's a way for parents to look to get more. And I think one of the things that's most important in the education system is allowing parents to seek more for their children. I think that really matters.
Can I just very quickly, I will let the audience go back to their Q&A very quickly, but Nathan, just the flip side of the apprenticeship question. How is it seen by your pupils? Is it a pathway or not?
Well, it is, but it's quite interesting. Not too long ago, we had a post-16 event for our students and, more importantly, for our parents when we were talking about the options. So we'd obviously talk about the traditional options, the traditional routes into A-levels, etc. And then we brought about, and we had a big focus, actually, and we had providers in school with us talking about the apprenticeship programs. And I remember I was stood there and I saw parents and kind of more strikingly teachers surprised at how good an opportunity the apprenticeships were and how you know, good a route it was, and also the degree level apprenticeships. And there's definitely still, even amongst, I'd say, teachers, like they don't know how good an opportunity that is. And the main thing is we had, and it was last year, we actually had some of our highest flyers who were opting for different routes, and speaking to our colleagues at Loreto College as well. You know, it's slowly getting there, but it's definitely not known as much by parents as well, and teachers and other people who have that influence on the children. I think it's great, and I know it made me think, you know, if I hadn't played football and gone down a different route, an apprenticeship would have definitely been something that would have appealed to me.
Can I just come on one? I just want to make, so obviously we was a special advisor in the department, and one of the things I really wanted to see when we were there was actually getting a degree apprenticeship into teaching. This is something horrifically pushed back by the education unions. They want to see it. They don't like it. They think they view it as a thin end of the wedge. To me, if we could see some, particularly for early, even if we just started in early years as an initial thing, I think a degree apprenticeship in teaching would be a great start to actually show the teaching profession that this is a real route into something good. And I'd really like to see that. While I was there, I also pushed the 30,000 starting salary, while Claire was the special advisor actually for Rishi when he was chief secretary as well. So, but I think that's important. I just wanted to mention one thing that Claire raised earlier on about that sort of aspiration element as well. That's the kids going into the, and I saw this when I was at Harrogate at the Army training scheme for the 16-year-olds. That there's kids there who did not realise how important maths and English were until they saw the fact that their corporal, who they respected and had been with them for 6 months as their basically the person they absolutely adored and admired, could not get his promotion to sergeant unless he had a GCSE equivalent level 4 in maths and English. it was the first time in their lives they'd ever actually seen the reason why it was valuable and why it mattered. That ambition is something, and those reasons for that are something we really need to, I don't know how we do it, but we've got to inculcate it much more broadly, especially for, and the stats will back it up, especially for white working class kids. We really have to do that, because without those, we then hold them back for every single further stage in their lives.
I have to let Claire defend herself.
So sorry, no, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things, because I think one of the things, as we were going through the pandemic, we were so worried about youth unemployment, and just looking at all of these schemes from within the Treasury, it was so clear that this in-work training was by far the best way to prepare people for work and make sure they don't sort of fall off the edge, which is why we have had this major increase in apprenticeships, and also for the first time ever we extended government funding for apprenticeships for people who are over 25, understanding actually this point of trying to retrain through your whole career. And we've done traineeships, sector-based work academies. We've really tried to throw the kitchen sink at people being able to train in work and have that pathway forward. And I think the success that we've had, particularly with degree apprenticeships that I would point out, is this change in status in people's minds. So much so now that we're worrying about disadvantaged children's access to degree apprenticeships, because it's become so popular with the middle classes. And I could definitely say from my parents in Surrey, who not all, but I think lots of sort of are that traditional sort of middle classes, would say now, actually, I'm very happy for my child to do a degree apprenticeship. And lastly, on this point of growing that awareness of what's out there, I think it's so important. And if people here who care about sort of regional inequality in education, I would say go and talk to Leah Nietzsche, who's our new MP for Grimsby as a former teacher. And she would say that, she had these apprenticeships locally where the starting salary was 65K. And when she would tell parents that, they would suddenly go, well, hang on a second, how can what subjects do they need to do to get that course? And one of these weird things that we have in our system here is that we have very bad local vacancy data for no good reason that I can understand, which means that you can't get schools the quick way of what is locally available for their young people to then go into the world of work. And I think that's something which is just a very small change, which would make a huge difference into that sort of careers, pathways and advice.
I think we're all now rethinking joining an apprenticeship schema. I'm going to take a few questions together. So if I could go for the lady right at the very back, the lady there, and then the gentleman just to her other side. So we'll go there, and then to the back. Yeah.
Yes, it's Jo Campion here from the National Deaf Children's Society. Deaf children have obviously had a really difficult time during the pandemic, with face masks obviously rendering face-to-face learning really, really challenging and a very isolating experience for them. But obviously remote learning has also been very challenging, with inaccessible, a lot of the content being not subtitled, and obviously if you are in primary school and can't read, then subtitles don't help either. So first a plea to make sure that your content is accessible, if it is, so that's great. But really for the panel, what can be done to make sure that any catch-up policies are both accessible for those children, but also targeted at those children who've really struggled during the pandemic and who have been sort of doubly disadvantaged? And then more broadly, did the panel have any ideas on what we can do to fix I think we can all accept is a broken special educational needs system? And I know the government has got a SEND review coming up, but we really need to do something to tackle this problem. Thank you.
Just the gentleman just on the other side. No? Okay. Yeah, just the gentleman just here. If you could just put your hand up again for me, thank you.
Just want to talk about air quality. Chris Peters, Policy at Manchester, University of Manchester. Some research has shown that a 50% increase in air pollution is the equivalent of someone being out of primary school for 8 weeks of a 12-month period, which is huge. The kicker, of course, is that air pollution is generally higher in poorer communities, so it is just not a level playing field. Only 2 clean air zones exist in the UK at the moment, so not enough is being done about this. What can we do to try and tackle that problem?
Perfect. And then the lady just rose at the very back. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Sam Butters. I'm co-CEO of the Fair Education Alliance. So my question is about the skills gap, which has obviously been a big topic for this conference, and so great that it's a priority for the government. Robert Halfon said if there is money, it's probably going to be going on skills. I've heard two things in Fringes earlier today. One was fantastic. Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, was saying what young people had told us in the hashtag Big Ask about what they want, and it was one of the big things was secure careers and a good job. On the other hand, in another fringe, we heard from a private sector CEO saying, as has been alluded to in this event, record numbers of job vacancies, but the biggest challenge is the skilled talent to fill those, so this mismatch. So we clearly have a problem. We clearly all agree that we need to fix it. But it feels like we're slipping into this kind of blame game of whose responsibility is it to make sure young people, adults, have those skills and get them the skills they need for the jobs that exist. So the question to the panel is, what's the combination of schools preparing young people with these skills, further education, higher education, or employers? But furthermore, who's good at it at the moment, and how are we funding them to do it even more? And how can we kind of make sure that the accountability is there to whoever we are tasking with solving this skills gap?
Brilliant. Three very diverse and interesting questions. I'm going to rattle all the way along and let people pick one or any closing remarks they want to tag on, and hopefully we can get through these in quick time. Rachel, do you want to choose first?
Yeah, I'll go with the last one first. So fundamentally, I think a school's job is to give children a broad-based education from which they can make choices, and ideally not irreversible choices. So I am always extremely reluctant to have, in school-based education, too tight choices too early on, because fundamentally when you're 13, you don't know what you want to do for the rest of your life. You need to give people that you're that broad-based. From there, it's interesting you said it was a blame game, because I think the only people we've blamed so far is the government. From there, I think the big hole is workplace training and more skills, not only once people are 16, but at whatever point in their life. And the purpose, we've referred to it lots of times, the idea is the government's going to bring in some legislation that will create a lifetime loan system. So rather than you only being able to go to university and have a loan system that way, you can use it for different kinds of courses throughout your life, and you start to put some more funding into that as well as apprenticeships, so that you create a more dynamic link between what employers want and the training that's available to them, because often otherwise it's very, very slow and broken. So that is fundamentally what the government said they want to do. We're just waiting for the SR and legislation to see what exactly that means and how much they'll fund it. I'll say very briefly on one of your questions, which is I think the only way you can do tutoring is one, face-to-face, because precisely the sorts of people who need tutoring are the ones who are not going to log on Zoom, and to direct it through schools according to their gaps and then let them tailor it accordingly. I don't think you can do this in a national planned way. I actually think the government's had a bit of an own goal, because they've spent quite a lot of money on tutoring and have got zero credit for it, because they haven't really shouted about it as much as I think they could, because it's one of the few things that I think has been a success story, is the way in which they've got money in so that they can start scaling this up.
I'll go on a couple of things. On the skills gap, who's to blame? How do we make it accountable? Look, I agree with Rachel. I think we need to keep that broad-based education until 16. As I said before, I have a really good college in my constituency, Derwentsside College, absolutely partners from 16, and it does a lot of adult coming in for retraining with local employers. If we can get good colleges, Chris and Suzanne, who run that college, are fantastic. I have never been to a college, even when I was Spada Education, which is as in tune with the local employers and the need for local skills market. They design courses for the local employers. You know, they are, and if they can be used as a model in some way for other areas, I really think that would be massively helpful and address that gap that you talk about. On special educational needs, we have to get away from a system where you get an EHCP and it is a golden ticket, and everybody else sort of has to fight within the school system. It's not a system that works. It's incredibly expensive, and I know from my own constituency that it's not always based on need sometimes, but on the parents who shout the loudest, and that is not a system we want to see. And I'll just leave it there.
So I think there's good evidence to support the importance of air quality in education. So all I can do is agree with you on that because I don't know how to solve it, but it would be unfair not to note that. I agree with the points on SEN provision as well. I think everything about this recovery needs a strong element of targeting to it. There are some generic things that you could do. Just generally good schools help all pupils, but if we have limited resources, we need to get it where it matters the most. And I think tutoring is a great form of targeted intervention there as well. I also agree in the sense that I don't think we should use schools to solve all of the problems of our society. That's one of our reasons why schools are overloaded, as we try to get them to do everything. Employers need to step up in particular, I think, on that one. But I do think that getting high quality careers advice that is independent inside schools has a huge contribution to play, so that young people aren't writing off particular options for them too early on that. And that means career advice very early on within the system. Then they can make sure they've got the subject choices, for example, that they could use. And I think as a sort of general parting remark on that one, the relationship between economic recovery and education recovery is incredibly close, and it runs in both directions as well. Absolutely, we need to improve the quality of education so that we can get economic growth in a particular area. But the existence of jobs and other opportunities also improves education as well. And for many young people and their families, it's a very rational choice to be looking at it and saying, I'm not sure why I would spend my teenage years working extra hard from this when there aren't the jobs to justify the qualifications that I'm receiving, or I will have to leave my hometown and travel 200 miles and live somewhere else in order to do the work that I'm qualified to do. That's why the education experience in London has been so different to many other parts of the country. London was waiting for the schools to catch up to it. There was aspiration, there was ambition in London, and it was like, teach us well enough because we can see the jobs. We only have to look up and see the towers, and we know we will get it. We need to be able to send the same story to young people in every part of our country as well, that it's worth investing in your education because there are great jobs. So we need to distribute those more fairly as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to claim all successes for the BME population, but there is some actually interesting analysis that part of the success of the London schools was the change in demographics.
Yep.
But I mean, I agree I'm not going to repeat what everyone said before, but just on this, and hello, Sam, just on this skills point, I do think it is a job for everyone. And actually, we should look at employers and some of the things that they can do. And one of the things I would just particularly mention is we've got some employers, not all, who've been very quick to move to remote working. And actually, if you were a disadvantaged young person going into your first job, trying to learn not only the skills of that trade and that job, but also the social skills of being maybe in an office environment, I think it's so crucial that employers, when they're coming up with their working introduction programs, are thinking about how they can give their young people the soft skills, as well as schools, government, and all the rest of them as well.
Yep, and on skills gap as well, I do think, as well as everybody else, schools do have an important role to play. And if you kind of just look at it on a micro level at my school, we have brought in a preparation for adulthood curriculum where we do look at the skills that people need, the transferable skills that are in particular industries, but also just in order for them to progress into the next step, and the things they need to be tools to be successful adults. Now, I do think, just very quickly, just in terms of the way that curriculums are designed and assessment in school, we have really looked at the last few years building into key skills into subject curriculums, and we do encourage and we do hope for scope and time within curriculum to do that. So we're not so exam focused, and we look about what do students actually need to learn. They don't just need to pass an exam. They need skills to go on to the next step. And linked into that, kind of weaving in the skills into individual subject schemes of learning and linked to the curriculum, is the real need to really instill and promote cultural capital linked into the skills for all of our students, and having the time, teachers and leaders feeling that they have the time to modify the schemes of work in order to look at skills and cultural capital and things that we want to give to our students.
I think Nathan is a fantastic example of what Russell was saying at the beginning of when you have great teachers and you have brilliant schools and you let them get on with the job, look at what can happen. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for this fascinating discussion. Thank you very much to our panel for joining us. I would like to give a quick plug to Rachel's report, Lost Learning, which is CPS's idea of how you can catch up on all of this.
I think it was your report too, Emily.
Which you can get copies of at the back. We also have another report coming out in the next few weeks precisely on skills, the topic which I think has been mentioned in every single panel event I have seen over the last 3 days. Thank you very much. Stick around. We've got another panel on rural economy, followed by Lord Frost and then Jacob Rees-Mogg this afternoon. And if not, I wish you a brilliant rest of your days. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.